You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. More communities across Central Florida are voting to remove fluoride from the water supply. Last week, the city of Melbourne was the latest to opt out. State Department of Health data shows nearly half of Florida counties have public water systems that actively fluoridate. That practice of adding fluoride to drinking water began about 70 years ago to help prevent cavities and tooth decay. Central Florida Public Media health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen and environment reporter Molly Durg are following the debates happening in our communities. They join us now in studio. Molly, Joe Mario, thank you for joining us here on Engage.
Hi there.
Glad to be here.
So you're going to share several voices from our Central Florida community on this issue with us. First, though, can you just bring us up to date on why this topic that many in the scientific community and the general public deemed safe and beneficial is once again up for questioning? This country's been adding fluoride to water for decades. Why are we seeing several Central Florida communities voting on whether to stop that practice now?
So, Sharon, despite the fact that water fluoridation has been heralded by a majority in the scientific community, for some, this has actually never been settled. Mm-hmm. And now, with President Donald Trump's pick for Health and Human Services Secretary in Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is anti-fluoride, this conversation has once again taken off.
We also need to mention that Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo issued new guidance discouraging local governments from fluoridating water and actually going as far as to call that public health malpractice.
So, Joe Mario, what are the concerns here with fluoride? Is it safe?
Well, prolonged exposure to high concentrations of fluoride can lead to fluorosis and discoloration of teeth. There's also a growing concern about potential cognitive impacts in children, things like ADHD and diminished impulse control, as well as a reduced IQ.
And also, we should mention fluoride is a naturally occurring mineral. It can be found in groundwater, soil, rivers, and lakes. A federal judge out of California recently ruled that fluoride in drinking water poses an unreasonable risk of reduced IQ in children, and that's at the levels that are currently considered optimal for preventing tooth decay. So that has also been fueling a lot of these conversations lately. That judge also wrote in his ruling that his ruling doesn't conclude with certainty that fluoridated water is harmful to public health. So definitely still leaves the door open for a lot of questions, especially for the Environmental Protection Agency, which regulates fluoridated water provided by public utilities. The judge ruled that EPA has to do something to neutralize the risk with fluoride without specifying exactly what that is.
Okay, and Molly, I'll start with you. So given this, what are you hearing from Central Floridians at these meetings on the future of fluoride?
Yeah, and as we've said, a lot of communities here are debating this question. One of the latest examples, as we said, is Melbourne in Brevard County, which just voted to stop fluoridating the water supply. Joe Mario and I were there at the discussion. It lasted until the wee hours of the morning.
Oh boy, it did.
Yes. And I want us to take a listen to some of the different perspectives that were shared that evening. Lots of people spoke. I believe about 50 people spoke during public comment. And bear in mind, the folks that you're about to hear from, you're going to hear from two different dentists, each with a different viewpoint on water fluoridation.
I'm sure that everybody in this room has the best intentions for the community, especially the kids, the most vulnerable of our populations. I am not anti-fluoride. I have it in my practice, but I use it as a targeted intervention. I do not recommend fluoridating our water system.
I understand that we want choices in our healthcare, in our life, and everything, but we have to balance that with societal benefits. And that limited access to care in Florida is a huge issue.
At that last point there, from a dentist who supports water fluoridation, really speaks to the concerns that many have about the broader public health consequences of stopping the practice. We might tend to think of cavities as a pretty minor thing, but the reality is they can have serious ramifications. Dr. Johnny Johnson, a pediatric dentist and now American Fluoridation Society president, told us dental disease is infectious and transmissible, and that it's the most common chronic disease worldwide.
People think that cavities are just a hole in the tooth. A cavity is an infection, and children and adults die every year because that infection in your mouth spreads into your bloodstream. It can go to your brain. You end up with a brain abscess, cardiac arrest.
This is very serious. Wow. So now what are we thinking the state of Florida is saying about these community changes? What are you hearing, Molly?
So as we mentioned before, at the end of last year, Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo issued guidance against fluoridating water. He was in Bartow earlier this month during a city council meeting talking about the issue, and he brought with him Ashley Mallon, a researcher from the University of Florida. And Mallon says she led the first study on fluoride's impact on children and pregnant women within the U.S. The population studied was out of Los Angeles County, California.
We found that higher exposure to fluoride during pregnancy was associated with more neurobehavioral problems in the children by age 3.
Mallon's study found these children experienced symptoms consistent with autism spectrum disorder, emotion dysregulation, anxiety, stomachs, and headaches.
Okay, so is this then being considered a win for those who have been sounding the alarm on fluoride, Joe Mario?
Well, it's consistent with what studies outside the U.S. have found. And to be clear, so far, most of those studies have been deemed low quality. But recently, a handful of high quality studies did find that for children, fluoride exposure levels at or above 1.5 parts per million are consistently associated with lower IQ.
Also, there's a key point here I want to make sure that we know. The federal judge who recently sided with fluoride critics agrees with the critics that the safety margin, that's the difference between the exposure level and the hazard level for fluoride, is too small. So typically in its risk assessment process for chemicals, the EPA will start off with a wider safety margin, usually 10 times the exposure level. But for fluoride, the hazard level is only about 2 times as high. And that federal judge is making that assessment based on the hazard level being like 1.5 parts per million based on the results of some of those studies. And again, 0.7 parts per million is the recommended amount for drinking water. So that's the margin he's talking about.
Hearing you both talk about this makes me wonder, Molly, is fluoride the only chemical in our drinking water?
Nope. We actually know a lot of chemicals to be in our drinking water. Some, like PFAS or forever chemicals, are known to cause serious health risks, but those PFAS enter our water supply in more subtle ways. For example, they're contained in firefighting foam, which eventually will saturate into the soil after it gets onto the ground, and that gets into the water supply. We're learning more about those PFAS every day. The EPA actually just started regulating levels for 6 groups of PFAS known to be in our drinking water, and we know there are thousands more of PFAS out there. But see, what's different with fluoride is it's being added intentionally to our drinking water, of course, as a public dental health measure. But that's where a lot of critics have raised concerns, and some even call it mass medication. It's the idea that you can't opt out of the treatment. But even then, I want to point out, fluoride is not the only chemical added to drinking water. So in Melbourne, for example, they'll periodically disinfect the water using chlorine to protect against microorganisms. So short answer is no, it is not the only chemical in our water.
So what happens now? Where are you expecting this fluoride conversation to go next?
Well, this recent fluoride ruling is recent, but it stems from a case that's been going on for years. It actually all stemmed from a citizen's petition filed after amendments were made to the Toxic Substances Control Act in 2016. And it's reportedly the first such citizen's petition to succeed, in that now with this ruling, it's basically directing the EPA to take action on a chemical. So it's going to be really interesting to see what changes we might see about how the EPA regulates other chemicals of potential concern. And keep in mind, we still have yet to see what exactly the EPA will do in response to this ruling on fluoride.
Central Florida Public Media health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen and environment reporter Molly Durig, thank you for walking us through all of this and the debate happening and sharing these voices from our Central Florida communities.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Ahead on Engage, we'll meet a man who has donated enough blood to fill the gas tank of your car 10 times over. And later, comedian Larry Fulford wants the audience to whip out their cell phones during his performance. He'll tell us why. This is Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, most comedians melt down when the audience engages with their cell phone instead of the performance. Larry Fulford encourages it.
I let the audience log in. It's a website. It's all safe, secure. They log in. We present the show in real time. And then from joke 1 to the very end of the show, they literally tell us in real time what joke they want to hear next.
We'll hear all about the What Do They Want From Us comedy experience. But first, most blood donors don't think about where their donations are headed. And most recipients don't consider the source of that life-saving transfusion. Engaged producer Richard Copeland did a deep dive into Central Florida blood donation, beginning at a blood clinic in Melbourne.
Picture a gallon jug of milk. It's something most of us buy pretty regularly. Now picture 155-gallon jugs of milk filling your garage. How much space it would take up. Imagine those 155 jugs are filled with blood. That's how much blood 66-year-old Bill Lundell of Indian Harbor Beach has donated since 1987. I joined him earlier this month as he gave at the One Blood Donation Center in Melbourne. This session pushed Bill's total past that 155-gallon mark.
There's a double and a single. I'm going to do a single today. There's a double. The double gets you off here quicker, the machine won't beat, right? But you got to have a hand free. I mean, you just have to have a hand free. I can't do it.
Bill is donating platelets today. This is different than whole blood donation, in which the blood is collected and stored as it comes out of the body. Platelets are required for blood to clot, and it's separated from the blood upon extraction.
That's plasma. The platelets are down in here. They're on a spindle down in here. You have to lift it out. And it's on a spindle. It's about an inch long and about a foot long where the platelets are at. And they have to shake them when it comes out because your platelets stick.
Bill Lundell is absolutely passionate about blood donation. He is at One Blood every 2 weeks like clockwork. This all began nearly 40 years ago when, as Bill describes it, he was working for the city of Melbourne's Water and Sewer Department.
The first day we walked into blood, there was three or four of us on the crew, and we walked in. The blood bank was over on Hickory here, and we walked in. That was my first day. It was January 20th, 1987.
And it was actually a city PR initiative that got him through the door.
It was an incentive with the city. It wasn't anything on my behalf. It was an incentive with the city to do community relations and all that, and get the city employees out there. So one thing was to donate blood. The other thing was to quit smoking cigarettes. And I was smoking cigarettes at the time, and I quit smoking a year later, January. The day the Florida lottery began in 1988. I think it was January 20th. So yeah, but I quit smoking cigarettes.
This first donation led to another and another until giving blood became something of a routine for Bill.
For about a year, I donated whole blood, whole regular red blood. And then they asked me to sit on these machines. And I said, sure. And then they called phoresis machine, it separates. The thing with when someone donates whole blood, generally, and after they separate it and all that, generally 3 to 5 people will receive that blood. When I donate platelets, or when anyone donates platelets, they separate it. 12 to 15 people, it's 3 times the amount, will receive that blood, will receive the platelets and everything.
Blood donation has become so much of a routine, in fact, that he can feel his body responding when he skips a session.
Well, I get a little antsy, but it's like I'm getting to the cutoff point now where you're allowed to donate 6 times a year for whole blood. I'm allowed to donate 24 times in a year, 24, every 2 weeks, except for the FDA, the Food and Drug. They are the one who controls the blood banks, and they say you have to take 6 weeks off or 2 months off. So I'm at that point now where I might be one thing away from, they'll cut me off for 2 months. It gives me a rest. It's supposed to give you a rest.
I asked Bill Lundell if he ever imagines who is receiving his blood, that there are thousands of Floridians walking around today with his blood in their veins. He shares this anecdote about an opportunity he had to meet a recipient.
Her name was Talia Castellanato. And she was a tween, 10, 11 years old at the time. This is a dozen years ago. And she had received these people's blood. And I guess One Blood wanted to show that, when you donate blood, you actually get to meet someone. Because I've never met anybody who I've donated blood to. And 3,700 people have received, according to them, have received my blood. So it was one of those things, but this young lady touched me. She was very shy. When I met her, she was shy and, but very, gracious and all that. But she passed away, like a year later after I met her. But the nice thing was, like, she was on Ellen DeGeneres' show, and Ellen gave her a makeup station because she would do videos. They're out there now, I think. They would do the videos. She would do makeup and all that, while she was sick. And this goes to the larger thing that, even while you're sick, she was still giving of herself. And I guess that's my point in donating blood is it was never about me. I didn't do it for me. It wasn't about the fame or the fortune. The fortune, there's certainly no fortune in it.
Back at the One Blood Donation Center, Bill is rifling through a pile of old photos with one hand while squeezing a stress ball with the other, stimulating the blood flow out of his arm through the plastic tubing into a machine that is separating his platelets from the rest of his blood. The pictures are from various blood donation sessions over the decades. He reminisces over each one like he's remembering old friends.
Here's my first donation right here, January 20th, 1987. They put them on, and the other ones here, I didn't bring the other ones, but they actually put my Social Security number up in there, my Social Security number. And here's my 10-gallon from Holmes Regional Medical Center. Here I am at the blood bank. That is over on Seminole. That was over in downtown. That was 2000. Look at that, I had long hair then. That was me with my truck.
This Saturday afternoon session will last a little more than an hour. Afterwards, Bill plans to stop by a local canal to take pictures of manatees. But he is already thinking ahead 2 weeks from that day when he can return to One Blood and begin donating towards his 156th gallon.
It's ironic. I didn't have children. I didn't want them. But the thing is, my DNA is inside these people. A piece of me is inside these people.
One Blood, the nonprofit organization that collected Bill's blood, operates from North Carolina to the Keys, providing safe and affordable blood in a regular supply. You may have even seen their big red bus parked in lots around Central Florida, encouraging residents to donate. They recently became the first blood bank in America to receive FDA approval for high-titer COVID-19 convalescent plasma for immunocompromised patients, a breakthrough that allows patients to make their own antibodies to COVID that they couldn't produce before. I spoke with Susan Forbes, Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications and Public Relations with One Blood, about the new plasma and the challenges of driving blood donors to the clinics.
In the start of the pandemic, you remember that convalescent plasma played a large role in being able to help provide a treatment during a pandemic that could potentially help patients who were struggling with recovering from COVID. And convalescent plasma, similar to what we were doing back during the pandemic, but now, at that time, it was under what was known as emergency use authorization. And now it has been licensed, which means that there's been a lot of collaboration that's been going on with One Blood, Johns Hopkins Medicine, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Mayo Clinic, AABB, and other agencies where we work together to provide the necessary data to the FDA to prove that convalescent plasma is safe and effective for patients who are immune compromised. So it is a big deal because it really starts a new era of treatment to protect the population who is immunocompromised. And the licensed high-titer COVID-19 convalescent plasma is providing really the only antibody. It's the only antibody therapy that keeps up with the variants and the mutations of COVID-19 and is able to protect the large community of individuals who are immunocompromised in our country. And it's definitely going to play a big role in their treatment if they contract COVID.
And this year will mark the 5th year since the beginning of the COVID era, for lack of a better term. Talk a little bit about the impact that had on One Blood for both donations and supply, and talk about sort of coming out of that today.
It changed how we operate for blood collections. It significantly impacted the blood supply during the start of the pandemic when everything was closed down and we weren't able to go out for our blood drives like we used to. And that really started to change the game on how we operate. And it really has shifted our collection strategy even 5 years later. We had to adapt to the environment that is at hand, and the need for blood continues no matter the circumstances, whether there's a pandemic or not. We must meet hospital demand because there's still patients who require blood transfusions every day around the clock. It never stops. People are not where they once were since the pandemic. People are still working from home. The remote work is a reality. That means when we take the big red bus out for blood drives to corporate organizations, the amount of people there in the office is not what it used to be. And that impacts blood collections when we go out to these blood drives. We literally run more blood drives now a month to collect roughly the same amount of blood that we were collecting over the past couple of years, but we have to run significantly more blood drives to meet that demand because people are not where they once were. And it's just the reality of what has happened since the pandemic.
What do you attribute that reduction in?
Well, it's really, there was a shift in society after the pandemic and during it, where people are. They're not where they once were. Even, high school blood drives and college blood drives, these are places where we go to have they account for a large portion of blood collections. High school drives and college drives, about 20% of blood collections. There's a lot of people taking classes online now who maybe aren't on campus like they used to be. Time is more precious. At high schools, they don't necessarily have the time they used to have to dedicate to blood drives. They still have them, but they may be a reduced time. So that's fewer donors that we're able to see at those drives. So you have to, look at all of those things and say, how can we get creative? Where can we find the donors? And it's about, adding additional blood drives, going out into the community and encouraging people to donate blood.
And I want to sort of look at that challenge through another perspective. This being Florida, we spend half the year living from hurricane to hurricane. Unfortunately, a narrative that won't go away are these mass shootings that generate these catastrophic events. And that's where we see people lining up to donate. Those in-between spaces, though, how do you keep that engagement going?
Well, look, we tackle this from all fronts, right? From communications with our tele-recruitment team, calling donors. We have a tremendous marketing team that puts out the call on every avenue possible, from social media to mailers to phone calls to everything that you can think of. We are doing it to actively engage with current donors and potential new donors. And it's really important that people who are able to donate step forward and do so, because less than 5% of the population is donating blood when upwards of 60% can but don't. So it's extraordinarily important that people who can donate do it. In an instant, any one of us can find ourselves on the receiving end of a blood transfusion. And that blood has to be there the moment a person is in need. And when you see mass tragedies happening, people want to do something to help. So it does motivate people to come out to donate. And it's a wonderful when people do that and they want to come out and help. But the fact of the matter is, every day there's a need for blood. And it's the people who are donating today who are going to ensure that blood is there tomorrow. So you don't want to be reactive to donating. You want to be proactive, because it takes a couple of days for your donation to be ready to go to the hospital. Once you donate, the process of preparing your donation for a hospital takes about 2 to 3 days. I mean, we have to test it. We need to process it. It needs to be labeled. It needs to be distributed. There's a lot of things that take place to ensure a safe and ready blood supply. And this is why you want to be donating each and every time you are eligible and making blood donation a habit. When the Pulse tragedy happened here in Orlando, we saw an unbelievable amount of people turning out to donate blood. I mean, it was overwhelming. It was heartwarming on how many people wanted to be able to help, and they did help replenish the blood supply. But there were people who came in just a few days before that tragedy who ensured that their blood donation was on the shelf ready to help those patients when they come in. We don't know when something like that's going to happen. We don't ever want it to happen anywhere ever again. But the fact of the matter is, we see these things playing out in the media all the time. And the blood supply is playing a role each and every time in saving these people's lives.
I had the opportunity to meet a donor, Bill Lundell, out in Melbourne. I got to witness his donation, which topped off a lifetime donation record of 155 gallons over 4 decades. How much of an outlier do donors like Bill represent? Or is there a sizable number of Bill Lundells out there that are every 2 weeks, they're regularly, they're part of sort of a core of the donation inventory?
Right. Bill is a wonderful example of somebody who makes blood donation a habit, and he's been doing it for decades. And he's the shining example of what you need people to do is make blood donation a habit. He's a platelet donor, and we have a lot of multi-gallon donors like Bill, and we need the next generation to be donating just like that. So as they get older, they too will be able to say, hey, I'm a 100+ gallon donor. That's extraordinary what Bill has done. And think of the countless lives that he has touched, that he has helped save. And to know that you've done something like that, I mean, he has helped save people's lives. And I always say, if you were walking down the street and saw that somebody was injured, you wouldn't just keep on going. You would stop and help them and say, how you want to help a person. You literally have the power to do that. It's running through your veins. And all it does is take a little bit of time for you to donate blood or to donate platelets, and you're saving somebody's life. There's several instances that I can remember, and even one most recently I heard about, where somebody was brought into the hospital and needed over 300 units of blood. Okay, you only have about 9 to 10 pints of blood in your body, and a patient was receiving over 300 units. That's 300 blood donors, because they're bleeding to death, and they're giving them more and more blood to keep them alive, to keep the oxygen in their body, to save their life. When a patient comes in and requires that much blood, that takes a hit to the blood supply. And so this is why every day it's important that people are donating so that we can replenish the blood that is used today. The donors who are coming in today, well, their donations will be ready to go in the next 48 hours to help replenish the supply. So it's a never ending need. There's never a day where blood donation is not needed.
Susan Forbes is the Senior Vice President for Corporate Communications and Public Relations with One Blood. When College Park residents Melissa and Michael Wiggins were told their 20-month-old son Cannon had stage 4 neuroblastoma cancer, they were told he had a 50-50 chance of survival. Today, he is a healthy and energetic 13-year-old. He wouldn't have reached this point without a colossal treatment plan that saw the Wiggins travel throughout the country for care, which included a seemingly endless series of blood transfusions. These transfusions are why Cannon is with us today, a point Melissa is more than cogent of. I wanted to talk with somebody at the end of the blood supply chain, somebody who wouldn't be here without life-saving donor blood. So I spoke with Melissa at length about Cannon's battle and the role donated blood played in his recovery.
Cannon was diagnosed at age 20 months with stage 4 neuroblastoma cancer, which at the time was the deadliest form of pediatric cancer. And at the time, it was the one that most children were getting. And a lot of the children that Cannon were diagnosed with did not survive. So it was very deadly. They told us he had a 50-50 chance that he would survive 5 years. And he is now 13, so he has defied the odds, which is wonderful. And he went through about 3.5 years of very aggressive treatment. So from the age of 20 months until he was about 5, he went through 9 rounds of chemotherapy, had proton radiation up at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He also had a 13-hour tumor resection at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which was followed by him on life support for 5 days. He has had a stem cell transplant at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And he did a trial out of Michigan that was a trial for kids like him because he had a particular gene that was very aggressive in that form of cancer. He also had immunotherapy in the ICU for a year. So he has been through the ringer, to say the least.
What you're describing would be harrowing for any adult. How did he manage it from 20 months on?
Yeah, so he didn't speak, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And there was just a lot of crying and a lot of I think him just wondering what the heck was going on, because he went from this sort of playful, rambunctious little boy who really became quite lifeless and reverted back to crawling and sort of really regressed as a 20-month-old. And when he was diagnosed, I gave birth to twins 10 days later. So we had 3 kids under the age of 2 and stage 4 cancer. And Cannon started to get really irritated as his little brother started to grow and play, and he wanted to play with them. And I always tell the twins that they helped save Cannon's life, because he would be lying on the couch just completely lifeless after treatment, and then see these little twins running around crawling and doing all the things that little boy twins do. And he would army crawl to just be a part of it. And the stronger they got and the more they did, the more he wanted to do. And I just feel like they are just still such a blessing in his life. They're they're like triplets.
Nothing motivates like a little sibling encouragement.
I know. And then I think the fact that it was the 2 of them and they're playing together and he's just sitting there, he was like, no. So, they would get into the water and we would start to do swim lessons as they were getting bigger. And then Cannon would be like, oh, well, I want to get into the water. And, so we got him a particular type of port that allowed him to be able to get into the water with the twins. And so he had a lot of time in the water with them. And I feel like that also really, really was very therapeutic for him.
During his treatment, he went through a colossal amount of transfusions. And that's what I would want to get to, is the role that played in his recovery.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that Cannon would not be alive but for blood donations. And I always feel like I sound so dramatic saying that, but it's just a fact. He literally would not be alive but for platelets and blood. And because of the extensive amount of treatment he had, he needed blood a lot. And after every round and after every treatment, and I used to take pictures, and I would take a picture of him going into the hospital, and he would be in a stroller and his head would just sort of be leaning on the side of the stroller, and he would just be completely lifeless, completely bald, just white. And we would go in, we would get the transfusions, and within 4 hours, it makes me want to cry. I would take videos of him running around the hospital. It was crazy, to watch it in real time, what blood donations actually do for these kids, the quality of life that it allows them. Some kids get to live longer because of blood donations, and also allows them to be able to do the treatments. It's, there's never enough way to thank the blood banks.
Do you ever talk with Cannon about, he's kind of carrying the legacy of so many anonymous people that reached out to help without knowing who they were helping.
I know. When we had a blood drive when Cannon was just diagnosed, and we knew some really powerful people at the hospital, just by chance. And they sort of made this big deal out of this blood drive, and it ended up being the largest blood donation blood drive in like Central Florida history, and we had it right outside of the courthouse. And one of my friends actually went and donated. Her name is Ashley Vandermark, and she went and donated. And when Cannon got his first ever blood bag hanging, her name was on it. I took a picture and I sent it, and I was like, you like literally are saving his life. And also, like, that is something that his dad and I couldn't do. So you feel so helpless. Like, I only in the last year have been allowed to donate blood, first of all, because I'm from the United Kingdom. And so, because of the mad cow disease, people from the UK have not been allowed to donate in the US until like the last year or so. So we actually worked with One Blood and did like a big, help them sort of bring that out and let everyone from the UK know you can actually now donate blood. And so his dad and I just felt very helpless during that time, because we felt like we couldn't give back what Cannon was taking. And our goal always was to try to like replenish what Cannon had been given. But I don't know if it's a possible task, but we try. And his dad has some health issues and can't donate, but I've been able to start donating, and that was really, really beautiful. But I also think all of the people that got to donate for Cannon really felt like they were doing something, and it wasn't just, oh, can we pray for you, or can we send a meal? Like, they were doing something really big and substantial that was saving his life. And I know that a lot of those people have continued to donate blood as well. Like, they've never stopped.
And that goes to something that we spoke with One Blood about, that, here, especially in Florida, we see the hurricanes. Unfortunately, we see things like these shootings, and we see blood donations spike during these events, but there's those in-between spaces. And Cannon really represents who is in those in-between spaces.
Yeah, he does. And like you said, not just in seasons of where there's a hurricane or there's this thing, but like a consistency of blood donations, so that we don't ever have to like run out. That was something that I had to do, was like ask people to go donate, because Cannon has a rare blood type, and so he couldn't just get any donation. It had to be like specific, and so we had to like ask, hey, if you have this blood type or universal blood type, please go donate, because the donations are running really low. He actually came with me to my first blood donation, and held my hand. Got to see. And his brothers were like, when can we donate blood? They're like ready to do it.
So at 13, how's Cannon doing today?
He's doing amazing. He's doing really good. He has challenges, like I think all cancer survivors have, but he is in a robotics team at school, and they just actually got to states for the first time in school history. And he is right now actually applying to a summer camp at West Point in Albany, to try to go away there for 4 days and live with the cadets and build robots. So he loves all of his STEM work, but he also plays every sport at school. There is the only sport that he has not played at school is volleyball.
Melissa Wiggins is a life coach and podcast host from College Park.
Coming up, we'll hear about an interactive improv group that has their audience using cell phones to script their shows. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. This is Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Before a movie starts playing on the big screen, a message plays asking people in the theater to refrain from talking or texting during the film. Signs reading "Please silence your cell phone" are plastered on the walls of many entertainment venues and auditoriums ahead of a show. While the people in the crowd of a stand-up comedy show created by St. Cloud resident Larry Fulford, they're told, do not put away your phone. He hosts What Do You Want From Us? It's a show directed by the audience. The viewers vote in real time to determine the content. Larry Fulford joined Engage ahead of the next performance in Orlando this week to explain how this all works.
So it all started with a comedian older than myself told me that you should be able to appeal to any crowd, and I thought that that was insane. But then I thought maybe the way to do that would be if you had multiple comedians and the audience told all of us as though we were one comedian what joke they wanted to hear next, and then it's out of our hands. If you don't like the show, you picked the show. So
How does it work?
so essentially, I take three comedians, and then I have myself and my co-host Ross McCoy. I take all of their jokes. It ends up being about 80 jokes. I build a poll out of these jokes, and then I let the audience log in. It's a website. It's all safe, secure. They log in. We present the show in real time, and then from joke one to the very end of the show, they literally tell us in real time what joke they want to hear next. They don't know who's going to tell the joke. Or exactly what the joke might be about, but they are going to pick the theme every step of the way.
Okay, can you think of an example without giving everything away? Like, is this like a whose line is it anyway deal?
It's not like that because
Okay.
it's not improv. Like these are actually like written jokes by these comics. They use them in their headlining sets. The example I always use is like it's pretty common. So I might have a prompt that says relationship status, and it might say single, dating, married, divorced, and the crowd will review that and be like, I want to hear a joke about divorced, and then the comic that's presumably been divorced will get up and tell their divorced joke, and then they sit down, we move right on to the next. It's just they're basically writing our sets for us is kind of the way I like to think about it, and then having no idea who's going to satisfy that joke.
Okay, so it's kind of like choose your own adventure.
I did used to call it that, and then
Okay.
I didn't want the choose your own adventure people to get mad at me, but
Okay, so it's kind of like the idea of that.
right.
Got it. So, Larry, how did you come up with this idea?
It was based on that conversation with that comedian that was like, if you're a good comedian, you should be able to appeal to any crowd. And I was like, that doesn't seem right because like music doesn't work that way. And then kind of as a goof on that person, I just started brainstorming the idea of like, well, if we could mathematically say at the end of the show, we gave this room every joke they wanted to hear, then we could say 100% we gave that crowd what they wanted.
What kind of topics would you touch on? Is it a topical show? Anything off limits?
Nothing off limits. I basically asked the comics that are involved, and it's a different lineup every time, to send me 20 of their jokes, 20 to 25 jokes that they would use in their own sets. I have no idea what I'm going to get. A lot of relationship stuff. Some people are more topical. One liner. I had a music guy. So it's a broad range. And that's what I like. That's what's fun about it. I try to get comics that aren't the same at all. Like that's the only sort of hand that I have in it is I don't want three white dudes talking about three white dude thing. I want it to be a mix so that the audience has a mix of topics to choose from.
Who is your audience? Is this a show for adults?
Yes, I would say
Okay.
adults. We present them as 18 and up because again, I don't know these jokes necessarily. I kind of know what each one is going to be about. Like it might be divorce, for instance, but I don't know the ins and outs. So it's certainly probably 18 and up.
Larry, I want to know a bit more about you. How did you get into stand up and sketch comedy?
I was probably like early, like 31, and it had always been something that people had said, like, you're funny, you should try stand up. And I was always terrified of public speaking. But then I was like, I saw friends of mine doing it, or at least trying it. And and I saw other comics that I didn't know in Orlando that were just brilliant. And I think that got me encouraged enough to try it. And then I just got the bug, so to speak. So, um, I don't know. I think the fascination for me is like I could write a joke this afternoon and then go try to find an open mic tonight to see if it works. So I got really hooked on that.
Can you talk about the first time you got up on stage?
Sure, I was terrified. It was at Austin's Coffee and Film, what feels like 100 years ago, and I was just kind of like glassy eyed. It didn't even feel real. It felt like I was watching somebody else flounder about and try to be funny in front of strangers. Just numb, heart racing. Um, and then I was like, I can't wait to do that again. And I've been doing it for 14 years.
Do you have any comic heroes you could share? Who inspired you?
Comic heroes. I mean, probably I'm a huge Steve Martin fan, which like the absurdity of that guy probably informs what do you want from us a great deal without me even thinking about it, just because he was just such a fantastic absurdist. Mitch Hedberg is brilliant because it's hard to write one-liner, let alone 90 minutes worth of one-liners. I miss that dude a great deal. Obviously, like Pryor, Carlin, those guys are legends.
How about movies or shows? Any that you think are just hilarious?
The Jerk with Steve Martin is my all-time favorite comedy movie, and then pretty much every single Mel Brooks movie.
Fair, fair. Okay, so do you think Florida humor, is that low-hanging fruit or never-ending source of material?
As far as like Florida man type, like people making fun of Florida,
Exactly.
it certainly it comes across as low-hanging fruit. And I was born and raised here. Like I spent some time in Chicago, but like um I don't want to say it's insulting, but I also have traveled enough where I'm like, there's like Florida man everywhere. Like Michigan has Florida man, but I think we're such an easy target for a lot of reasons. So I think if you throw out a joke about Florida, it's probably guaranteed to get a laugh because it's a trope at this point.
And tell me about what we can expect at the show on Friday.
So Friday is for the very first time, my buddy Ryan Holmes is going to be on the show. I got Shireen Kassam. She's done the show before. She's brilliant. And then this time, what we're doing for the first time is me and my co-host Ross McCoy are also going to be the comics. So it's going to be the four of us. I have no idea what to expect. That's what's fun for me is I have no clue like what to expect. And the other thing that I love about the show is these are one and done. Like if you go see any of these comics do their act, you're going to get their act probably pretty much the same every time. This show is never going to repeat itself because it's totally in the hands of the crowd.
Larry Fulford is a creator and host of the interactive stand-up comedy show, What Do You Want From Us? He will be one of those comedians performing this Friday, January 24th, at Framework Craft Coffee House on North Mills Avenue in Orlando. That's all for today's edition of Engage. We are back Tuesday at 3 o'clock. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for joining us. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.